10 o'clock. We're going to get started. Good morning. My name is Randy Roberts. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order. A couple of items. We have members joining us virtually today. For those of you that are with us virtually, please use the hand raise function on your system, and we will be watching that to acknowledge you. Those who are in the room will be using microphones today. Please remember to turn your microphone on. The little button on the base of the microphone will turn blue when you're on. Okay. Our first order of business this morning is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion from a member of the board to approve the agenda? Stephen, do we have a second? Second, Kim. Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
I think I heard Ann. Yes, Wolf. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That reminder, if you make a motion, please state your name for the minutes. Thank you. All right, the agenda is approved. Thank you. We'll now move to introductions, and we'll begin with those board members present in the room, and I'll turn to my left. Steve.
Steve Waugh. I am a director and reside here in Topeka, and I represent General Public.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Limbird. I'm from Prairie Village, Kansas, and represent Public also.
I'm Richard Brookman, Director of Southwest Kansas Library System, representing the systems through the state.
Tom Taylor, Andover, Kansas, representing public libraries.
Ray Walling, State Librarian.
And now those members that are virtual with us, can we start with Susan?
I'm Susan Moyer. I'm Director at Dorothy Bramlage Public Library in Junction City, and I'm representing the General Federation of Women's Clubs.
Ann? Ann, are you there? I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Ann. Okay, I believe Rhoda, are you there?
I am. Good morning. Rhoda McLaughlin Ramirez from Cali College, representing to your academic libraries.
And we have Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Nocita, new to the board, and I am representing school librarians. I am in Johnson County at Blue Valley.
All right, thank you, and welcome, Lisa. All right, if I missed anyone. Thank you. We're now moved to opportunity for public comment. And as we did last month, a couple of rules will apply for public comment. We are allowing 20 minutes for this section of the agenda. We will allow 3 minutes per individual speaker for public comments. We will be timing and try to let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining. And if you wish to make public comments, either in person or virtually this morning, please state your name and please state on whose behalf you are speaking. We also want to indicate under opportunity for public comments that there are several letters received that should be in the packet as well. Does anyone wish to make public comment this morning? Anyone, public comments? If not, then I want to turn it over to State Librarian Ray Walling.
Just two other housekeeping items. For those attending virtually, please enter your name and library in the chat. So we have this for the minutes. And then also, Wolf, can you send the letter that we received from the Hayes Council? Can you post that to the virtual meeting so attendees have access to that? We received a second letter. The Salina Public Library letter was in the board packet. And since then, we received a letter from the Hayes Public Libraries Council. And there is tangible copies here for the board, but we want to make sure that's available electronically for members that are attending. Those minutes will be added as an addendum to that letter will be added as an addendum to the minutes. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ray. All right, if there is no one wishing to make public comment this morning, we'll check virtually real quickly here. All right, seeing none, we'll move to approval of the June 9 minutes. Is there a motion from the board to approve the minutes of the meeting of June 9th?
This is Bonnie. So moved.
Bonnie Limbard moved. Is there a second?
Tom Taylor,
Susan
second.
Moyer, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. If there are no additions or corrections to those minutes, noted. And those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Okay.
Those minutes of June 9th are approved. We'll move to approval of the minutes of June 27th. Are there any additions or corrections anyone wishes to note? The minutes of June 27th? If not, I would entertain a motion for their approval.
This is Steve. I
Susan
so-
Moyer, so moved.
Okay, so we have a motion from Steve, and we have a second from Susan Moyer. Those in favor of approval of the minutes of June 27th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Those minutes are approved as well. We now move to item 6, which is reports, and we will call upon State Librarian Ray Walling for his report.
If we could bring up the PowerPoint. Ask your patience for a second. We're having a technical snag. We'll let them continue to work on that. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Sarah to come up to the podium for a special recognition. The mic on.
Yes, I see a light. It's just short. Okay. Today we recognize Cindy Roop's 43 years of service to the State Library of Kansas. On June 18, 1980, Cindy entered state service as a library assistant. She developed significant expertise and served as the interim state librarian on 2 different occasions. as well as being the director of reference for many years. Cindy's service across 44 legislative sessions included the initiation of the reference chat service, leading the digitization project of a significant portion of the state library's collection, and planning and organizing the library collections following the completion of the renovation in 2012. Cindy served on the Notable Books Committee for years, providing selections of books either about Kansas or by Kansas authors for the collection. Cindy also volunteered as part of the Kansas Book Festival Planning Committee, making connections and helping the program overall. When asked about working with Cindy over the years, this is what Gordon Self, Reviser of Statutes, had to say. Cindy has been an invaluable resource for myself and the Revisor's office over the years. When we provide orientation for new attorneys, Cindy is the first resource that we provide to the new revisors to help ensure their success. Contact Cindy for help is a very common answer to many questions in our office. On a personal level, I can't count the number of times, maybe a million, that I have dropped in Cindy's office and asked for help and guidance on a legislative question or long ago event. Cindy's professional assistance over the years has helped me beyond words. Her calm demeanor and friendly manner is a welcome relief in the State House. Cindy is simply my #1 resource and a great friend. On Cindy's 40th anniversary of service to the state of Kansas, Alan Conroy wrote, "You should be very proud of your years of dedicated service, your contributions in assisting all Kansans, but especially to your service to legislators and the staff of the Legislative Research Department through the years has been invaluable. I can think of many times from my service in the Legislative Research Department that if our staff was stymied trying to gather information for a legislative request, we could always count on you to come to the rescue with the right information. I can also recall talking to many legislators through the years when they would tell me that Cindy answered their question or provided the information needed for a policy discussion or debate." State Librarian Ray Walling also praised Cindy's work, noting, "With a career spanning 6 state librarians and 2 periods of serving as interim state librarian herself, Cindy has not only witnessed a lot of change at the agency, but also has been instrumental in that change. She doesn't just supervise or train her direct reports, she has been a valued mentor to early career librarians as well as the seasoned staff across the agency. Her vast knowledge of government information and dedication to customer service are held in high esteem in divisions and offices throughout state government, which has been vital to the image and reputation of the agency. We will be forever grateful for her contributions to the agency, the profession, state government, and the citizens of Kansas." When asked about their experiences working with Cindy over the years, one common theme among her employees was how helpful Cindy was in supporting their work with her trusted mentoring and helping to develop skills needed in the library world. Donna Casement said, "One of the many managerial qualities I appreciate about Cindy was the fact that no matter how busy she was or how many projects she was juggling, when you appeared at her doorway, she would stop what she was doing and cordially listen to whatever concern you may need to talk about. I never felt like she wasn't interested or didn't care about the issue of the moment. I believe her entire staff appreciated the supportive quality she consistently exhibited." Vicki Wolf noted, "When Cindy became my supervisor, she had to learn how to work with me, but she did so in record time and we worked very well together. She was always there for me and promoted the things I did, which I greatly appreciated." Dakota Hurd recognized Cindy's commitment to her work by saying, "From the first few months working at the state library, it was easy to see that Cindy had been a key part of the state library for many years. Whether it's helping a colleague with a simple question or greeting patrons by name, nothing is too small for Cindy. She has been a huge part of my development as a librarian and professional over the 2 years that I've worked with her. The dedication for her work and the wisdom she takes with her will be missed. It has truly been a joy to work with Cindy." And I personally worked with Cindy for 11 of her 43 years, which has always been a pleasure. Early on, I realized any questions I asked would be answered thoughtfully and factually with correct information. I also knew that her door would be open at any time and that I could count on her to proofread anything I came up with. It really speaks to Cindy's professionalism that she is always patient and helpful when we needed it, especially in some of the circumstances that the reference librarians find ourselves in. Cindy will be missed by so many people, including us here at the State Library, state agency colleagues, legislators, and other librarians, just to name a few. Thank you for all that you've done. In honor of Cindy Roop's 43 years of service to the State Library of Kansas and the Kansas Library community, I request these remarks be added to the minutes of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Cindy. As far as the PowerPoint, do we have the PowerPoint up at this point? We're not seeing it. Let's go forward several slides. Okay, I'll just go ahead and hopefully they'll catch up with me when it's up. So a couple of announcements staffing wise. Sarah, we just heard from, has been promoted to Director of Reference Services. And Dakota Hurd has been promoted to Legislative Reference Librarian, which means we have a reference librarian position that's currently open, and we are currently in the process of hiring for that position. I wanted to inform you of a special project we've had come along in the last several weeks. Feels like months now, but the State Library was approached by the Brownstone Book Fund, and we were given a great opportunity to allow 100 libraries in the state to receive a gift of 100 children's books. So in consultation with the Kansas Youth Library Consultants, with the regional system directors, we've worked to help make this happen. The 100 libraries have been notified as of this week and are working on getting their paperwork in to BirdArt so we can get this process moving. But we are very grateful to the Brownstone Book Fund for this donation. And I know many of the libraries have expressed that gratitude through emails and communications to me and to Diane Brownstone. So thank you again for that. I do want to provide an update on the financial situation for the State Library. First of all, as we head, I still think, towards a federal shutdown, I looked at the news recently, we have been asked by the Division of Budget about how that would impact the agency. Assuming that the current protocols are still going to hold true for the agency, we have approximately 700,000 more than that that we are allowed to use before we get reimbursement from the federal government for LSTA money. And at this point, the amount that we have left to spend this fiscal year is less than that number. So in theory, we shouldn't have to get a reimbursement for the rest of the fiscal year. Ideally, we would like to receive it on a regular basis, assuming the federal government does not shut down or opens up rather quickly. Regardless, we should be fine. So that's kind of where we're at there. The other thing that happens in September is we submit our annual budget. So this is an opportunity for the agency to revise its 2024 budget and to propose a 2025 budget. It's considered, it has two components, the performance-based budgeting and the budget narrative. The performance-based budgeting is run by the KLRD, the Legislative Research Division. They normally send out their paperwork months in advance, but they changed the process this year, so we actually received it later than the deadline. And they've adjusted the deadline to turn that paperwork in mid-October. So we'll be doing that. However, the Division of Budget that does the budget narrative and the actual submission of the budget, we did get our budget in on the 13th, 2 days early. And we're talking a little bit about that budget in the next couple slides. So there's just a quick overview. The budget cycle is a year-long process. So at this point, we have submitted our budget to the Division of Budget to review and then to take to the governor's office and for consideration. Then basically it goes to the legislature and eventually we find out what we have received. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding sources. So we have 4 funding sources for the state library: the state general fund, the fees fund, the federal fund, and the grants and donations fund. The bulk of our money is from the state general fund. You'll notice there is a jump from fiscal year 23 to 24 of approximately $214,000, I think. The vast majority of that change is due to the pay plan that was implemented to improve state salaries across all agencies. So that is reflected in the 24 budget, as well as a significant increase due to benefits costs that's added to our budget every year, depending on what they anticipate the benefits cost each year. A couple other additional things that have been added. There was a provision in the omnibus bill to add the Blind Information Access Program for fiscal year 24. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then some of what you're seeing in 23 also is when they pull the actual 23 number, not all of our bills have come in from fiscal year 23 at that point. We are permitted to pay them after June 30th. So there's some spending that's not reflected up there in that number. But I wanted to give you an idea of what that number looked like. You'll notice that in FY25 from the state general fund, it goes down by $30,000 roughly, which that's because the omnibus bill funded the Blind Information Access Program for 1 year, but did not fund it for the subsequent year. So that essentially is $30,000 that's lost there. In the past, the fees fund, which we basically collect money from photocopies and lost and damaged books, we have not spent. We just let it accumulate over time. Starting next year, we're actually going to spend it down each year. So we're planning to use it for the lease cost that we have for the photocopiers that we have in the building. Then the federal fund, this is a combination of 2 things, at least 23. We had some remaining ARPA funds that we spent out. So the ARPA budget unit that we have within the federal fund is now closed as of this week. However, the rest of that is from the LSTA program. And as you may know from the last federal fiscal cycle, there was a significant increase in the money that was allocated to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for the LSTA program. So essentially, there was an increase in fiscal year 22, federal fiscal year 22, that is. We received $1,934,170. In federal fiscal year 23, we received $2,121,682. So that's a big jump. Those numbers aren't quite reflected in the expenditures by funding source because that operates on the state fiscal year versus the federal fiscal year. We have 2 years essentially to spend the money because it's a 2-year grant cycle, but we receive new money in each year. And the way the agency's funding currently is set up, we tend to spend that money toward the end of the 2nd year, which is fortunate for us in case there's budget issues and federal shutdowns because we still have money from the other grant that we receive because we always have 2 grants going on simultaneously. So we're fortunate because we have that FY23 money, most of it still available to us. The grants and donations line, those are special funds we have for various reasons that are in one fund. Usually what we do with that is when we have money coming in for travel where we get reimbursed or we have a grant for some reason or another, we put it into that fund and then spend it out for that travel that was associated with that grant. So that's where that expenditure is for. Let's move to the next slide. Move forward one more. Or not. Well, the next slide is going to talk about the budget expenditures by classification code. And what we'll see on it is that we spent less. We're starting with salaries and wage category. It's coming up right now. There's a significant jump from 23 to 24 and a smaller jump to 25. From 23 to 24, several factors are in play there. We spent less than we budgeted due to vacancies, restructuring, and hiring salaries. We also talked about that pay plan, that significant pay plan increase, as well as benefit increase that we saw this year. So that's one of the other explanations for that large jump. We also this year will be filling 2 open positions that we have, which are budgeted in for part of a year of 24 and then fully funded in 25. So again, that's part of what the increase from 24 to 25 is, as well as benefit changes from 24 to 25, if that makes sense. In regards to contractual services, we have a jump from 23 to 24 of $258,000. As some of you know, we have Tumbleweeds Books subscription. That was a 3-year subscription that was funded through ARPA money. That subscription expires at the end of the current fiscal year. So we did put aside approximately $100,000 for replacement or for renewing it. We might need more depending on which option we go with, but we wanted to allocate some money for that purpose. We also have the typical inflation that's associated with databases and other contractual services that's factored in there. As I mentioned last year, we made an effort to fund professional development for the agency staff, which hadn't been done consistently, I think, in the past. So that's one of the increases we're seeing, as well as that blind information access program of $30,000 that is added for 24, but then removed for 25. So some of the inflation that we have between those fiscal years is hidden by that $30,000 that's not yet funded for the Blind Information Access Program. The commodities, there's not a big jump there. It's going down. And part of the reason it's going down is there was an error in coding, not from the agency, but from one of the subsequent agencies. And this apparently happened to other agencies as well. So about $3,000 of that 4,000-ish was an error in coding. It's money we did spend. It just was coded in the wrong category for some reason, or not, we don't know. Capital outlay, there's a decrease. Part of the decrease for that is we had the ebooks that were reclassified last year in consultation with the Smart Service Center and the auditors as contractual services, rather than they were also included in capital outlay and commodities in the past for some reason. So that's why there's a drop there, because part of last year we were still classifying under the other class. We were classifying it as capital outlay rather than contractual services, but moving forward, there will be contractual services. The other rationale for those changes, we have an agency office, the Statewide Services Office and Alice's office, that are in Landon, and we have moved from the 8th floor to the 7th floor, and we need some additional furniture that we're in the process of planning and purchasing. So there's some additional expense next year, or sorry, this current fiscal year 24, that we're not going to see the following fiscal year, which explains that further decline of capital outlay. The aid to locals stays relatively consistent other than the first year. FY23, we had $35,000-ish of ARPA money that was associated with that aid to locals. As I said, that was a one-time fund that has been closed. So therefore, that's why I see a little bit of a drop from 23 to 24, but 24 to 25, not that much different. So having said all of that, do you have any questions at this point before I move on to the next piece? The legislative reference librarian was filling a current position. The 2 positions will be deputy state librarian, and the other one will be a public library services, we haven't named the title position, but essentially a public library development position. So that's the plan to do within this fiscal year. Yep. Other questions? Okay, then we're going to talk about budget enhancements. So in the state government, we have 2 different ways to change our budget. One's for the current fiscal year and one's for the budget year, or essentially the next fiscal year. But the enhancement request is for the next fiscal year. So at the beginning of the budget process, I receive a number from the Division of Budget, which essentially is my last budget, minus any one-time funding, but then plus any changes for benefits or any other thing that the legislature has added to our budget. And I start with that number as the next budget year, the fiscal year 25 in this case, as the number I have to budget for when I submit my budget. But if I want any additional money for any reason, then I have to submit an enhancement request. This year, we have submitted 5 enhancement requests. The first 2 are associated with state aid. And as it says on the screen, the state librarian is responsible for estimating the needed state aid for libraries across the state. It's based on the amount that they've requested, as well as the amounts that are reasonably available for these purposes. So before I jump into what I've recommended, I wanted to take a step back and talk about state aid. So first of all, whatever number I put in, 2/3 of that goes to libraries and 1/3 of it goes to the regional systems. And there's different formulas and statute and regulation of how that occurs. We're going to focus on the public library portion of that for this talk. So the public library portion essentially is a per capita approach, but it's described very differently, but we're just going to say it's a per capita population-based formula. So the funding history of that is right now, state aid sits at $1,067,914. That's the full amount. When we're looking at the statistics recently, we noticed that 75% of state aid that goes out to libraries, 75% of the libraries, they receive less than $1,000 a year in state aid. Additionally, the amount that they receive is about 28 cents per capita for state aid. So 2 things to keep in mind. But then if we look back, in 2000, state aid was about $2.8 million. And if we look back further to 1987, that was the last time we had state aid lower than what it is now. Neither of those figures factors in inflation. So I think it's important to recognize the history and where we're at currently. To help gather what libraries requested, there were 2 surveys that were put out. I want to talk a little bit about them. But basically, they kind of came, at least the way I interpreted the results, I came to the conclusion that the population-based formula, the per capita-based formula, works okay when we talk about the medium-sized libraries, so the Service Center 2, the Major Service Center 1, Major Service Center 2. I'll explain that in a second. But the smaller libraries, it's not working out well for because they have a higher need. What we saw in the statistics, or the data that came back, I should say, is that significant higher need. So the gateway libraries, in one of the surveys, they requested $7.95 per capita. The next size up, the next service size up was $3.05, and then the Service Center 1 was $1.73. After that point, we noticed that the next 3, those middle 3 that I mentioned earlier, had a very similar per capita request. In one of the surveys, it was 66, 67 cents for all 3 service levels. So it felt like it kind of leveled out at that point. If we could meet that per capita request for the medium libraries, that's great. We still have to address how to support the smaller libraries that have higher need for state aid. So if we go to the next slide here, it's going to be hard to read on the screen, but I will try to explain it. As I mentioned, the original formula is a per capita formula. The first enhancement requests a technical amendment to the current statutes that would allow for a base grant. In the budget, I proposed a base grant of $3,000 for each library, each public library in the state. As I mentioned earlier, when we have an increase in grant and aid, 2/3 of that goes to libraries and 1/3 of it goes to the regional systems. So if we increased and this went through, that $972,000 would be allocated to public libraries, and then $486,000 would be allocated to the regional systems. So that's part 1. That's to help with that higher need at smaller library level. Part 2 was looking at that other piece, that idea of the 66, 67 cents per capita being a good amount for several service levels within the state. So that's what I ended up doing, was proposing changing that amount and increasing the amount for the formula-based part of the equation to be 67 cents per capita, and actually fund it based on the Kansas certified population number, which comes out in July. So that makes it easier for us to know what number to use when we're creating the budget. Again, that's 2/3. So if we're talking about 1.9 million, almost $2 million, say $2 million, then we have to have $1 million that goes to the regional systems under the current statutory structure. So hopefully that makes some sense. I'm going to pause for a second for questions from the board about that. But remembering, this is a process that goes through the Division of Budget, the governor's office, the legislature. So this is just a proposal at this point.
Ray, could you clarify, and I think some of the board would appreciate it too, what the different size categories of libraries are? I know you alluded to it, but
so in the public library standards, there are service levels that are established under the current standards. There's the Gateway Library, which is under 500 people. The Linking category, which is 500 to 999. Service Center, which is 1,000 to 2,499. The Service Center 2, which is 2,500 to 9,999. Major Service Center, which is 10,000 to 24,999. Major Service Center 2, which is 25,000 to 99,999. And then the Major Resource Center, which is the 100,000 and over. Like I was trying to explain, those smaller libraries, the Gateway, the Linking, and the Service Center 1, so populations of 0 up to 2,500 essentially was where we saw that higher need before it leveled off in Service Center 2, Major Service Center 1, and Major Service Center 2 at that 67 cents on average. So that population is the 2,500 up to 100,000.
Ray, where are those listed?
Where are what listed? The service centers?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the size that you just gave. I was trying to write and I couldn't write that fast.
On the regional systems website, they have the library standards document as one of the menu drop downs. And it includes, I think it's on the first page, I want to say even, maybe second page. It has the actual service levels listed there. Was this Ann that asked that?
Yes.
Okay. I'd be happy to send that document to the board after the meeting. That'd be helpful.
That would be great. Thank you.
That's what I proposed. We also kind of looked at it as well from, well, what would inflation be if we had stayed at that 2.8, or even if we went from that $1 million in 1987 and that $4.5 million would be kind of where we would be at today if that had been adjusted over time. So that was a thought as well when we were looking at these numbers.
this is Tom, and I just have a comment. Andover Public Library falls into the major service center category, and Ray is right. The percentage of our overall budget that comes from state aid is fairly small, and it's significant, but it's not as significant as it would be for the smaller libraries. And I appreciate your thought on that. Still, under this request, major service center and above would still be getting increased funding, which is wonderful. But I do agree that the smaller libraries, it's more valuable to them. And representing public libraries, I want to thank you for this effort.
Any other questions before I move on to the other three enhancements? Okay, let's go to the next slide then. So the other three enhancements are related to two things. First, the state courier subsidy, which, as you might remember from the strategic plan, we had a goal to cover a certain percentage of that cost. That way it's not passed fully on to the libraries and the regional systems. So we use the percentage, the 25%, as the goal based on that objective of our strategic plan, and asked for an increase there. You'll see in a second. The other piece, which we talked about a few times already, the Blind Information Access Program from last year's omnibus bill, is interesting for a couple reasons. One, there is current legislation, Senate Bill 284, that would establish that program as an ongoing expense for the state library and service of the state library. I put more positively say service for the state library, that we're excited about providing. It's a great service that they want to provide with news content and other kind of, not I won't say periodical, but periodical content essentially, that would be available to users throughout the state of the Talking Books program. So we're excited that there's this interest in providing that. However, Senate Bill 284 did not make it past committee last session, so we still have another session of our biannual legislature where it could come back and could be finalized. But that Senate bill was asked to use money from the Universal Service Fund. So I'm going to move on from that to the omnibus, which I keep mentioning. The omnibus bill funded this program for fiscal year 24 using state general funds. The problem we have, though, is the services is currently being provided by another organization, so we're happy to take on the responsibility, but we think there's a need for people to understand that it's an annual subscription, it's an annual cost. So we've been transferred the service for 1 year with no plan of how to fund it the following year. So if we move on to the next slide, go back to the Courier for a second. That 25% would be an increase of about $62,000 additional for the Courier, and that was enhancement 3. Enhancement 4 for the Blind Information Access Program, we received $30,000 from the omnibus bill for 24. We've asked an enhancement request for $31,000 for fiscal year 25. So we don't know what's going to happen with Senate Bill 284. It could go through, it could not go through, but we feel an obligation if we're taking on this service, we need to make sure that it's funded moving forward. So there's that piece. And then enhancement number 5 is to fund a part-time staff position to help support that program. There's no funding in the omnibus bill for outreach marketing, for actually doing the thing that we need to do as far as certifying people for this program. So there's that aspect, as well as there's been a need in the agency to record additional periodical material, additional material of a local Kansas interest. This platform allows us to add that content to it, which is great, but we need somebody to do that. So part of this position would also be to do that. And we think based on the way Senate Bill 284 was written, the way that the omnibus bill was written, there is that desire of that local content. So we think this is something that's a feasible thing to request. So before I move on, are there any questions about those 3 budget enhancements?
So is the $30,000 for the program, is that like a subscription cost? And what exactly does it do again? And
it's a contractual service. We have not officially contracted with a company, and the actual bill doesn't tell us which company to contract with, so I can't say anything yet about which company we're going with. But the purpose of it is essentially periodical content, national news content, international news content. I'm looking at Michael if he has anything else to add, because he spent more time on the webinars with one of the vendors. So I'll let him speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's audio content. The actual bill's written for international, national, and local news content, job postings, ads for retail stores that are all in an audio format, and they're provided either through a computer access, a mobile app, or a telephone access program. So you could dial in and get the information from the Hayes Post. Am I making up that one? But any of the local newspapers that are currently hosted, and then it would allow us to upload newsletters from a lot of our blind organizations or our area agencies on aging, our current newsletter. So some of the stuff that we already produce, it'll allow us to put it out onto a different platform that other people will have access to in that way if they want it, instead of the way they're currently receiving it.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, it's just for audio and not for Braille? Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions, let's move on to the next slide. So we've had close communications with the Office of Broadband Development over the last several months. I met with them earlier this week, and they asked me to do a quick plug, which I was happy to do, for two initiatives. Actually, I should mention also that next week is Digital Inclusion Week, so they're going to be promoting a lot of things through social media and press releases and other things. But one of the things they're going to do is they're going to have a digital equity public comment webinar. So they've developed a state plan for digital equity that they're going to talk about during the webinar, but then also offer opportunities for people or explain how people can provide comment before they go to the final version of that plan. So I wanted to mention that first. The second thing, if we go to the next slide, is the Affordable Connectivity Program. So this is an income-based program, from my understanding. Currently, 27% of the population that's eligible, or households that are eligible for this program, are signed up for it. But it's a great program that provides discounts on monthly broadband access of $30 for households, and also $75 for households if they're on tribal lands. Additionally, there's a one-time discount of up to $100 for laptops, desktops, tablets from participating providers, as long as you meet certain requirements. I have in the back of the room, kind of over there on the desk, I have 2 flyers that you are welcome to take with you. And you can take extra ones for some of the system directors if you're going to be traveling and visiting libraries. They were hoping we could get these out to the libraries so that they could be seen everywhere across the state. So there's about 100 copies in both piles. There's a Spanish one and an English flyer that they brought to us today. So I just wanted to make that quick plug. Wolf, did you have something? Just let me repeat that for everyone. So Wolf's going to be sending out social media materials for both of these to the listserv, and you're going to be reposting things next week for Digital Inclusion Week. So there'll be more opportunities to see it. But again, if you can take some flyers with you, that would be appreciated. Let's go to the next slide. That's all for my report, unless you have questions for me.
Are you going to email these slides out to the group?
I can email them out to you. I'll send that when I send the Public Library Standards document as well. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ray, very much. You'll note, board members will note in their packet, there is some information from various division reports from the State Library as well. We will move on to item B under reports, which is the Kansas Library Express Courier Report. I'll invite Michael McDonald.
Thank you. So in your board packet, there is a courier service report. I just wanted to touch on a few highlights. Participation in the courier is at 356 libraries. You may recall that there was a fire in the Topeka hub earlier this year. Happy to report that we have completed issuing reimbursement checks to all of the libraries that submitted or reported a loss. Every few years, we conduct a turnaround time study where we put slips that the libraries use, and they indicate when the materials are leaving a library, and then the receiving library indicates when they received it. And all of these slips then get sent into our office. And Lars Leon, he is a librarian at KU Libraries, and he's on the courier committee. And so he volunteers every few years to go through all those slips, and they are able to then put together some useful data on how efficient the courier is with turnaround time. Let's see. volume averaged about 72,484 items for this 1 year period that we're reporting on today. And that equates to about 99 cents per item shipped. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Right. Next is item C, regional system reports. We have system representatives who wish to make a report today. Chair recognizes Gail Santee.
I am. Good morning. I do have two things. I wanted to report that the CCALS Executive Board has voted, and as of the end of February 2025, CCALS will no longer be supporting Hoopla for member libraries. That has just become fiscally unfeasible, and that's been the case in multiple places across the country. Our board has not yet determined if they will reallocate that money or if they will not tax for it. My proposal would be to reallocate that money into digital content through a different platform. The system is a member of the Overdrive Library Consortium, and we also contribute to the state content as well. And the other thing that I noticed is on my way into Topeka on I-70, there is an Imagination Library, free books for children, billboard, and I just was really tickled when I saw that. I don't know if that's from the state library or from Topeka or from wherever, but boy, I'd like to see more of those across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Chair also notes for the board that there are two pieces of correspondence from CKLS that were included in your packet under this section. Any other system directors wish to make a report today?
I'll just make a brief report for Southwest. A lot of individuals know about the challenges at DCPL. They had a special board meeting the other week, and the 6 items that were up for reconsideration, the board did choose to retain them within their library and in the same section. Whether that will move forward to any other possibility of litigation, nobody knows, but that would be the next step. But the board has reviewed and made their final decision. For us, for a little bit of a change up, you'll notice down at the bottom, Swickles has decided not to renew the contract with BPH. We decided that it was with the staffing being as low as we were, we could not do it. However, it's not going to affect our system plan. The board said that we go through mid-2024 with the grant. From that point to the end of 2024, we would use our own funds to support that project. So it will not be any end of service in July. We'll continue through all of 2024, like stated in our plan. So we don't need to file an amendment. And then after that, we are not just going to shut the door. If we do receive questions or an application through the mail, we'll forward it to Emporia. We'll get those questions sent to the right people, or if we happen to know the answers, we'll relay that information. It's not a complete shutting of the door. It's just looking at what's feasible with the staffing. And that was the decision for what the board decided to do.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Do you have any system director virtually? No virtual, okay. Any other system directors today? Okay, thank you. Does any member of the board, any board member wish to make a report?
This is Tom. I wanted to report that the Andover Public Library had a successful summer reading program, and I would like to acknowledge the state library's contributions to the statewide summer reading program, as well as to the various regional library systems. The services and especially the content that you provide is very helpful, and I wanted to recognize you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Any other member of the board present or virtual?
This is Richard from the representative for systems. I do have a report, but it kind of fits in with the committee report. So I don't know if Randy, you want me to wait till that point and make comments from the committee, or if you want me to do it now.
We will wait until we have that report. I think we'll have a recommendation. We'll move to discussion, Richard. So we'll welcome you to comment at that time. Okay. All right. Yes, Bonnie.
This be an okay time for a question or just reports?
I think we can entertain a question, see what we have.
Ms. Santee kind of referenced it, but the Imagination Dolly Parton thing, what is the affiliation? I saw you shake your head that it's not the state library, but how did that come about outside of the state library, if you know?
I think the Children's Cabinet was the one that took it on as a project several years ago. And they've worked with counties to have local So we've just said there's an office in Landon that's specifically for the Imagination Library. So again, it's done through the Children's Cabinet, not the State Library.
Thank you for that clarification and question. Okay. I believe we then are ready to move to item E, which is our board subcommittee report. This was a report prepared by a committee of 3 on behalf of the State Library Board. Tom Taylor chaired that along with Rhoda and Steve. Tom, I first would turn to you to ask if you have any clarifying or any additional information that you wish to bring relating to that report.
Thank you, Randy. Just a few things. If you look at the report, number 1, that is for the 2024 Sickles Plan as amended. 2 was, if you recall, Central Kansas Library System wants to stop doing memorandum-based funding, and that would include the previously called processing grants to both Hayes and Salina. So the concern of those libraries, as well as our committee, is the feasibility of the system taking on the processing. And I realize that that's something that has been partially answered, but that was one thing we wanted to look at. And in regard to memorandums, it is our committee's belief that the State Library Advisory Board should not enter into a memorandum of understanding between this board and the Central Kansas Library System. We believe the charge of this board is only for annual approval of system plans. You see the letter from Central Kansas Library System. They are indicating that they intend to phase out the allotments. That is rather significant in regard to what the committee has addressed. And then I think perhaps we can get to the system plan considerations. We'll get to that here in a moment. But I guess if anyone has any questions, maybe Steve, I, or Rhoda could answer them about the report.
All right, Tom, thank you for that, those comments. So I would call upon the members of that committee or the board if there's a motion to be made relative to this report. Chair recognizes Steve.
I would move that the board endorse the recommendations of the committee and authorize the state librarian and his staff to draft new or revised regulations based on the committee's recommendations provided in paragraphs 5B, 6, and 7 of the report that was in the packet.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second to this motion? Do we need to restate the motion, or is there a second to this motion?
This is Ann. I'll second it.
Right, we have a second from Ann. Now, is there discussion? Questions or discussion around this motion? Chair recognizes Richard.
Like I said, this kind of ties into the system concerns. Part of the report, just visiting with the other system directors, is part of the system plan consideration. When things are being considered for the systems, we wish to be included within the discussion at the minimum, so we can formulate those together and to best serve the libraries that we serve. We don't want to have a piece dropped off that might be missed. I mean, that's always the case, even when you have a group together, but try to catch as many loopholes and little seams and cracks and try to cement those and work with each system, because we are a little bit more different than each 7 are different, especially mine. So we want to make sure that anything that's done will be able to accept all 7 systems within those planning structures. Within, and the other directors, if you give them a chance to mention anything, which I know don't need to, but within just discussions with my board, one of the main things of concern with some of these issues was when you look at 752549A, the system board is a body, corporate, and politic. That means we make our own bylaws, we make our own plans, we make our own budget. This board's duties as by 752552 is to approve the system petitions, review a system plan or any system amendment plan that we send forward, certify the librarian of the system, and any other advisable things that the board needs to discuss. That advisable, we would like to see described a little bit better, because we are a very red state, and in my section of the world, we are extremely red. And one of the key components is, and the question I kept getting was, why are they taking away our local control? Why is this board trying to interfere with how this board operates when we are our own independent governing body? So I wish that the board will consider that, since the systems are a body, corporate, and politic, which entails us to those rights. So, and by statute, those rights. So that's the discussion that I've had with my systems. You would have to get with the other system directors, see what they've had specifically. The feedback I've received from the directors was just the consideration, like I mentioned already, just have us within the discussion.
Okay, Richard, Chair recognizes Ray Wallen.
I would say that several groups and people will be involved in the process of developing these regulation changes, amendments, or new regulations, including the system directors. So I acknowledge that request. But I do recognize that the State Library Board has responsibilities under statute that we need to follow and to enact. So we will do what we were required to do and what we're allowed to do under statute. But in that process, we will consult with the system directors and other parties.
Ray, can I ask a quick question about that? Do you have any indication of how long such a review and regulatory change might take?
I do not know the timeline of how long it would take. I can tell you there's a process outlined, and there's a document that tells you all the steps you have to go through the Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's office, the hearing, etc. So it could take some time, especially when there's a number of things that have been requested to look at, not just from the Hayes committee, but also from what Richard has said, us to look at another aspect that the system directors or his system board wants us to look at. So there's several matters. We have to remember that this stuff, all the regulations mostly were developed in the 60s. So it was a long time. It takes time to make changes. So.
Right. Thank you. Is there other discussion, other question or discussion?
I had a
Yes, Kimberly?
Okay, this is just a very wide-ranging topic, and I just want some clarification. The motion is basically for this board to kind of move forward on authorizing the committee document 5, 6, and 7. So basically, solely looking at a standardization of system plans, procedures on what to do if the system plan is not implemented, maybe looking at the definition and application of digital resources, and then looking at what the regulations are around exclusion of a regional system taxing district. Is that all we're talking about in this motion? It's like what we want the state library staff to look at.
Steve, is that consistent with the motion that you have made?
That's consistent with the motion that I made. There has to be some fences around it. And so that seemed to make sense to me.
I think that kind of clarifies it, and it falls more into maybe the scope of what this board has. So kind of my other question was kind of based on that we're just looking at that 5, 6, and 7. How does that with the systems and local libraries, does that feel like that maybe is kind of taking away local control, or how does I would like to just kind of hear that.
Part of what the systems are looking at is you're changing up regulations and forms, which we agree need to update it. We're not questioning that. We're agreeable. We just want to possibly have Steve maybe amend his motion to allow the state library to address concerns that the systems boards as well as directors have. Part of this consideration is a punishment level, which is nowhere in statute that this board has authority on. So that's consideration that my board really has a problem with, is that when you're talking about punishments, and this board is supposed to assist libraries throughout the whole state, you're actually penalizing a board that is their own governing body that is serving their community to where their board agrees is serving their community, that this body should not be interfering with and punishing in that way and taking away funding. That is one consideration to look at. The considerations of how the board is structured, I think has come up a couple of different times. My board is only a full board. We do not have an executive board. So we need to have considerations between systems that are extremely different than others. And then the way the makeup is with some of the considerations of, the Hayes is wanting to have their recommendations of being on committees and the board as equal representation. They already have representation on that board. Why are we looking at this board alone, there's more public librarians here than there are other librarians. That's the way boards are made up. When you're forming committees, the chair of a board determines those committees like Randy did. This one did go through a vote, which is kind of unusual, but it can be done as a procedure. But usually it's only a chair that does that. A committee is not determined by the board, but by your chair. So those are some considerations to think about as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at and saying that if you're going to take some of these controls away, how can you when we are our own governing body?
Okay.
This is Tom. I guess what controls do you see being taken away? Specific to 5, 6, and 7.
I think my concerns I've already listed off. So Like I said, the digital resources and free service. Our system does it completely different than others. We do not offer out of district service money. You either take the services we offer. If you do something different, that's up to you. We will not make you pay for the whole system. That's not just on your library. So other libraries have different ways of doing it. So we just want to make sure some of those differences are recognized. And for the other libraries, and is there a need for out of service? So some of those questions are looked at. Let's see, 7. Really, that's a discussion that Ray and the directors are already having. So it's just the main thing is just keeping those discussions open to the system directors and our board. So we're not left in the dark. Is one of the things this board does well, as one of the complaints that Hayes submitted was they had their own representation on a committee. Well, this last committee that the state board did, the systems had no representation on that committee. So consider that as well. So those are just some concerns that I'm bringing back and looking at and trying to look at the statutes of everything and the concerns that Hayes and Salina are bringing up.
Okay. Right. Richard, thank you for informing us of the concerns that are out there. Is there any other Ray? Recognize Ray?
Go back to Bonnie's earlier question and clarify maybe Kim's question. I can't remember which. Steve, your original motion also included the endorsement of the report itself. So the endorsement of the other aspects that maybe weren't regulation changes, but just recommendations about best practices for virtual meetings and those kinds of things that we weren't going to have regulation creation for. So just to clarify, your motion also is to endorse those recommendations just as best practices and things that we really encourage the systems to do for, well, I'll let you clarify from that.
Right. As I stated it, initially, I move the board endorse the recommendations of the committee. That's kind of, as Dr. Seuss would say, thing number one. Moving on from that, and state librarian and his staff draft or revised regulations. So that's in the context of endorsing the whole report.
Any other discussion, or any of our board members that are virtual have any questions or items of discussion?
This is Tom. I guess, Richard, would you have a potential amendment to this?
To answer that question, no, we're not saying that. We just want to be part of that discussion. That way, like I said earlier, we try to make sure every system is kind of looked at and how the differences are. We recognize that they do need updated. We're not questioning that.
Right. If there are no other questions or discussion, then we have Steve's motion on the floor. Does anyone need that motion read again? If not, then those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Those opposed to the motion, please say aye. Does anyone abstain from the motion? Motion carries. And Chair wishes to thank Tom and Steve and Rhoda for their work on this, and thank members of the board for their understanding and consideration of this process and motion. Thank you. All right. We're ready for item 8, business items. These are action items. The first A, motion regarding board committee recommendations. I need to move down then, excuse me. B, statewide courier grant application. Need a motion to approve statewide courier grant application. Is there a motion from a member of the board?
This is Kim Beats. I'll make the motion to approve.
Richard, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any question or discussion? If not, those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any board member opposed, same sign, aye. Motion approved. We have Talking Book Service Outreach Grant applications. So first we have Central Kansas Library System. Is there a motion to approve?
Susan Moyer, so moved.
Susan Moyer made a motion. Is there a second? Steve has seconded. Any discussion? Those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Northwest Kansas Library System. Is there a motion to approve the outreach grant application?
Richard, I'll move.
Richard has moved. Is there a second?
Susan Moyer, second.
Susan has seconded. Those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 I think that was unanimous. All right, motion approved. And third, Southeast Kansas Library System Talking Book Service Outreach Grant application. Is there a motion to approve?
Richard, also move again.
Thank you, Richard's motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Steve has seconded. All right. Those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Motion is approved. Next we have item D, which is certification of Sandy Wilkerson as a professional librarian. Does anyone need to speak to this? Ray?
So as a reminder, this is done in regard to KR 5417, which lists requirements including bachelor's degree from a recognized college or university, professional education, a fifth-year degree or its equivalent from an accredited library school, and experience of 2 years full-time professional experience in an administrative position. And to clarify, what we're doing is certifying Sandy to be a professional librarian. It's the exact wording.
All right, thank you, Ray.
This is Tom. I move that we certify Sandy Wilkerson as a professional librarian.
We have a motion in favor of certification. Is there a second?
This is
Rhoda
Kim Beats. I'll
McLaughlin
second.
Ramirez, I'll second.
Okay, I heard Kim Beats, a second. Thank you. All right, those in favor of this motion to approve Sandy, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Chair recognizes Ray Walling with some announcements.
So just a reminder, our next board meeting is scheduled for December 8th via Zoom. Just as a heads up, documents and correspondence to be added to the board packets must be submitted by the end of business on November 16th, 2023, due to the Thanksgiving holiday. So please turn in all documents before that time. We will not be adding documents that have been received after that deadline. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. At this time, the chair entertains a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Does Richard also move?
All right, we have a motion for adjournment. Is there a second?
This is Bonnie, I'll second.
Bonnie Limbert has seconded. Those in favor of the motion,
This is
please
Ann,
say
I
aye.
second.
Okay. We stand adjourned and thank each one of you for participating and for attending today. Thank you.
Just one more quick note for those that are attending lunch after the words. Lunch isn't going to be till about 11:45, so we have a little bit of time, but just be patient. It will be on our normal spot on the 4th floor, north wing.
All right. Thank you,